Salutations, viewers. Happy Wednesday. I've just had my legs waxed. It's a very weird feeling. It's taken me ages to scrub off the band-aid style marks on my legs. So, today I am talking about pro-social media versus anti-social media. Dedication to Miss Roper, who's my media psychology teacher, and a dedication to my friend Abby, who helped me compile the plan for this video. So media psychology, as you'll guess, is the psychological side of anything media-based. So, advertising, video games, computers, persuasive media, all that comes under media psychology. So I'm talking about the benefits of pro-social media. So that's stuff that will either present or promote pro-social ideals such as altruism, sharing, equality. And talking about the effects of anti-social media, that's stuff like violent video games or racism media or anything along that lines. A lot of this you can use if you're doing AQA for psychology, which is that one. It's A2. So if you're doing that, you can AQA. You can use this for your AO1 for pro-social and anti-social media. So, let's start with pro-social. So, examples of pro-social media are stuff like Sesame Street, because they promote and present pro-social ideals, especially to young children who are the most affected by these ideals. So, Bandura, who's famous for doing a study into aggression in children, he argued that we'd learn through observation and imitation, so we see something and we copy it. And he says it's the exact same for watching pro-social and anti-social media. So if we see pro-social media, such as Sesame Street, and we are able to relate to the person telling us about the pro-social act, so if we relate in some way to, the celebrity who's on the show that week, we'll be able to imitate the behaviour we see. So that's Bandura's observation and imitation, or social learning theory. Another theme that we have is parental mediation. So it's not just enough that you have this pro-social ideal, you need someone to reinforce it. So what studies have found, including Rosenkotter, they have found that children who watch shows like Sesame Street with a co-viewer are much more likely to understand and take on the pro-social ideals they've been presented, because there's someone that can bounce ideas off or someone who can help them reinforce that idea, instead of if they just watched it on their own. Interesting fact that Sesame Street was actually originally aimed at inner city kids, because they were the ones that people felt were most likely to behave antisocially. However, it's found that people in a higher socioeconomic background, so people who are a little more well off, were actually being affected by Sesame Street more, because they were the ones who were more likely to watch it with their parents or another guardian, while as people in inner city areas were just going to watch it on their own. And so I mentioned Rosenkotter before, and in 1999 his paper came out, and he argued that children as young as 7 can understand the complex themes within adult sitcoms as long as there's an adult present. So they can understand the themes in something like Friends or How I Met Your Mother, because the adult who watched it with them could help them understand these complex themes such as death or cheating or breaking off friendships. So one of the biggest psychologist in the area of pro-social media is a man called Mares, and he did a meta-analysis, which is a review of several different sources of information, and you pull the results of all the sources, and he found there's 4 areas that are affected behaviourally by pro-social media. They're altruism, so the studies that were talking about altruism had shown kids Lassie, and it was found that the children were more likely to help a group of puppies after they'd watched Lassie than if they'd just watched something like Batman or a neutral show that had neither pro-social or anti-social media. Self-control, so kids watched Mr. Rogers. I love Mr. Rogers, he's so cool. And they were more likely to share and restrain themselves from greed or violence. Generally, positive interaction, so kids who had seen pro-social media were more likely to play nicely with other children, be polite, help people out, whereas people who'd watched antisocial media, such as violent cartoons, had been found to be more likely to be angry, aggressive, start fights, even if they're just play fights. And finally, anti-stereotyping. It's an interesting one that some trial runs have been done with shows that try to combat sexism, racism, but in kids. So the results are positive, actually, that pro-social media, which is anti-stereotyping, will reduce the views that children may hold, so they may be more responsive to girls, or they may not tease girls or boys, depending on the gender of the person. They might be more inclusive of someone that isn't the same skin colour as everyone else in the class. So if there's one Indian boy in the class, they may be included more because people have learnt it's wrong to exclude people of other colours. However, as I said, this is a video about both antisocial and pro-social, so we're going to have to talk about the effects of antisocial. I've picked two. So, desensitization and lowered physical arousal is one of the biggest ones that we find with violent video games and general antisocial media. Giles, 2003, found that children who played violent video games and watched antisocial media such as violent films reacted differently to violence over time. This is explained by lowered physiological arousal. So children would actually react differently to violence in real life if they'd been exposed to a lot of it as a younger child. So if I say I played COD every day for 3 years, I may have a different attitude to violence. I may be less inclined to react negatively to violence than if I hadn't played COD for 3 years. And this loss of inhibitions may actually lead to me using violence more. Similarly, justification is an interesting one, where children watch and play these violent games and watch these violent TV shows, and the violence on those shows and games is justified. So it's, oh yes, I killed a person, but it was because they were going to kill 10 other people. Or, I killed them because they were a bad person. These are very, very simple messages, and they're not put there by the person who made the game or the film because that would be bad, but they still come across, and kids will pick up on this, and they'll think, hang on, if I punch Tommy Bennett in the playground tomorrow because he was being mean to me, it's justified because he was a bad person. Now that may seem like a very harmless example because it's just two children, but if they got older and they went, oh, that person sells drugs, I could go take them out, that would be worse, because yes, the person does something wrong, but you shouldn't take justice into your own hands because you've seen it justified on TV and in video games. I have some extra arguments that you may or may not want to use depending on their appropriateness to the course. Realism. It's interesting that some arguments for antisocial games is that they present a more real world. So if you just showed people pro-social images, it wouldn't work as well because they'd go out into the world thinking that the world was a utopia, whereas they'd be struck by the reality that it's very not a utopia and that there is violence. So that's one argument for antisocial games, to be honest, and antisocial media in general. Popularity is interesting as well because while pro-social games and media may be helpful, they're not as popular because there isn't the excitement factor. If there's a game that teaches you to be kind and run a successful business, it might not be that successful because there's not the excitement there. Whereas COD, or the latest violent game in a franchise, may be more appealing because of its heavy violence and its excitement and its physiological arousal that it brings up. So that's the arguments for and against pro-social, antisocial media. What side do you come down on? Do you think that we should have stricter rules or not? Post that in the comments. I'm not sure what Avery's doing next week, but I'm sure I'll be better than this. But the week after, I'm going to continue this theme about media psychology, and I'm going to look into violent video games and the different types of violent video games that we come across in our lives. So have a good week, guys. Love you lots. Peace out.